Interviews are the first thing that you learn to get information that later becomes a requirement. If I were to ask anybody, like my peers, my colleagues, my friends, or any expert in the field, or you were to ask me, what's your top one technique to gather project information? There would be the same answer: by conducting interviews or performing document analysis. That's because these two techniques are so universal, so versatile, that they would cover easily about 80% of information gathering cases. Of course, there are some other techniques like brainstorming, workshops, surveys, and many more. There are about 20 to 30 techniques actually that are commonly known, but among all of them, the interviews are the absolute king. And it's rather natural, right? Because interviews are basically conversation between two or more individuals, which is the most common form of communicating that came right before writing. Here is where you might ask yourself, if it's so common and if we have been mastering this for thousands of years, why should someone make a video about that? It's because just conducting interviews is one thing, but mastering them and getting the most out of this technique is very different. And because business analysts still make the same mistakes to the day, that's precisely why you should learn from this video. Okay, we've established that interviews are conversations between two or more individuals in which you ask some questions, you document their answers, and you follow up with even more questions. You do that until you reach the goal you've set before the interview, which is usually to get some new information or clarify something. Seems quite easy. Perhaps some questions, ask them, get responses, and that's it. You nailed it, right? Not quite. Because there is something that makes a great interview, not just one of many. There is a hidden mastery in using this technique, and I'm getting to explain it right in a bit. Like most other elicitation techniques, interview consists of three major steps: preparation, conduct, and confirmation. Let's go through each of these steps to understand how to use the interview technique. The first step is to begin preparing for interview by following this simple flow. First, define the scope of your interview. What is your goal? What is the kind of information you would like to get from stakeholders? These are the questions that you should answer yourself first. Many aspiring BAs, sometimes even experienced ones, fail to state the specific objectives they want to achieve during the interview. Because of that, BAs focus on wrong questions and do not prepare stakeholders correctly, which results in failed interviews. So to make sure that everything goes smoothly, clearly outline the objectives and align questions for each of them. Secondly, set up your logistics. Depending on the interview goal and stakeholder locations, plan where, when, and how the interview should happen. Logistics include communication channels, resources like rooms and tools, timing, and duration. All is affected by what you want to get from an interview. For example, if your stakeholders are in your location, it would be perfect to face them personally and have a nice, quiet room for a conversation. And of course, logistics includes a clear buy-in from stakeholders. Otherwise, you just risk attending the interview all by yourself. Next, prepare supporting materials. Sometimes words are not enough to have a proper conversation. People have different communication needs and preferences. Some people better understand numerical and written information. Others, they kind of rely on a visual support. That's why different documents, infographics, presentations, handouts, and other types of information may significantly help at some point or even be the foundation of your discussion. In cases when you present requirements models, be sure to share them both before and during the conversation so that every stakeholder has their copy. Supporting materials are not a must, and many interviews can be conducted without them. Although you should always consider it during preparation, as if you don't, it is unlikely you magically pull them out of your sleeve during the interview. Make sure that your stakeholders are prepared. You may want to send them the agenda with the questions before the meeting, so that participants can learn the scope of the gathering. It wouldn't hurt to ask whether they understand the value, if they feel like they are the best people to answer your particular questions. Sometimes people could help and point out toward the person who will be the better choice than them. After you get everything you need, you've prepared, you can proceed to step 2 and conduct an interview. This is where your conversation mastery becomes crucial. Interviews, they consist of 3 elements. First is guiding or facilitating what's going on. During the interview, you may want to make sure that participants are involved. With one person, it's simple. With multiple, it might just become a problem. To engage people, ask them to comment or maybe build on other people's answers. Rotating and asking different people is also great, as it doesn't focus on one stakeholder. Sometimes the conversation may steer far from the original goal, and in this case, you may politely say something like, okay, thank you for sharing. I will put it down. Let's now get back on track. If stakeholders keep steering away, you can always stop the interview and have a short, quick conversation about the goals of the interview and whether you are fitting into them. The second key element to great interviews is capturing the results. During the interview, you get tons of information. Of course, it's almost impossible to remember everything, so making notes is essential. You can do that with your notepad, you can make an electronic note, or you can even record your meetings visually or just audio, but be sure to get consent from your stakeholders on the latter. I prefer making notes electronically, as this is probably the most efficient way. I know that some BAs prefer writing with a pen, but this requires you to later transfer your notes into electronic meeting minutes anyway, so thus you are duplicating the effort, which is not efficient. On top of that, if your writing is not ideal, you may lose some information as you will need to decipher your own notes, especially if you do that in a couple of days. As for recording, I have nothing against them for aspiring BAs, but I strongly believe that experts shouldn't rely on them though. And the third element to the great interviews is what you do with the questions you prepared and how do you ask them. So there are two types of questions: open-ended and closed-ended. Open-ended questions help creating a dialogue, and they are good to allow stakeholders to provide information you even may be unaware of. They also create an opportunity to uncover different paths for the conversation and help you steer it as planned. Closed questions, on the other hand, they help you get a single response, such as yes or no or a specific number. They are great at clarifying or confirming one of the previous answers. As a rule of thumb, you should always plan your conversations around the open-ended questions. If you only use closed questions, interviews become like a spoken surveys, which is a total time waste. There are exceptions, of course, like maybe when you want to confirm some facts before proceeding with your main questions line. But otherwise, you should always use closed questions only for clarification. We've gone through 2 or 3 steps of doing an interview. The third one is confirmation. It is important for business analysts to organize all the elicitation results and share them with the stakeholders as soon as possible after the interview. First is because if you do that too late, people may already forget about the context of your conversation and react unexpectedly to what you share. Secondly, without confirmation, you have a risk of blocking yourself with further steps like analyzing current state or proceeding with requirements modeling or even assessing critical risk related to the scope of your elicitation. On top of that, sharing the information that you got from your stakeholders is a way for them to point out any missed or incorrectly recorded items, which simply prevents possible mistakes during the next steps. Now that we know how to prepare and conduct an interview, what makes you a great interviewer compared to others? That's the time to answer that question. So here are 3 tips on how to become a pro in conducting stakeholders interviews. And the first tip is to learn how to automate your notes or pull up them quickly after the interview. Who would you rather talk to? The person who has a conversation with you or someone who sits for the whole minute after you stop and scribble something in their notes? The answer is obvious, isn't it? The side effect of an interview and one of the strengths of this technique that no other techniques has is the intimacy of the process when you speak to the person one-to-one. One of the key tasks of business analysts is building a relationship with stakeholders. During interviews, unlike anywhere else, you have this great opportunity to focus on a single person and get a lot of information in private that people may be even reluctant to share in public. Thus, if you focus on your notes instead of a person, you will not benefit from that side effect. So either try making quick notes, recording and subscribing your conversations, or try this next tip. What do we do with elicitation results? Preferably after confirming them, which is not a must though, we begin to model requirements based on information we got from stakeholders. What if I say that the coolest thing you could do during the interview is to make notes right in the format of requirements? What if during the first meeting with the client, you produce a list of high-level user stories for their product just 5 minutes after the call? Or what if you model a low fidelity mockup on a whiteboard for key screens of the system while they are still talking? That might sound crazy. It may feel impossible to listen and model simultaneously, but believe my 12 years of experience, when you do something like that during the meeting, your authority and stakeholders' trust skyrocket immediately. And just one more thing. What does your typical interview look like, especially when you have little experience? You state the goal and start going from question to question, meticulously writing down the answers. How does it feel? Absolutely boring. I hate such interviews because it feels like you are in the precincts and the police officer interrogates you. Of course, this is where most business analysts start. That's the first step. Although you must aim to the next level as soon as possible. Instead, learn the icebreakers and how to make a small talk. Every stakeholder is a person, so you should treat them like one. Ask them not only about what they need, but inquire about their feelings about the particular situation, support their decisions, share your views on the situation, and suggest your opinions. What you really want is to get to the state when you almost have no questions, but you have statements and expert opinions on the scope of the situation, which stakeholders confirmed or they build up on your ideas. Not only do your interviews become more pleasant this way, but they also help you build trust in your expertise, which leads to accessing more exciting tasks and challenges. How do you excel and grow with these tips? Only by applying them, trying, failing, learning, or maybe even exercising with your peers who also need to improve. But don't afraid, try these tips and you'll see how far you can go with them. And if you like tips like this, don't be shy and press this like button and subscribe to my channel, as there are more useful videos in my backlog and they will be coming up very soon.